my little angels, come in. Come in. I'm so excited to see you. This is a really special video and I'm so proud of it. We're doing a collab, myself and Lorri Latte ASMR, Christmas carols in front of the tree. She's going to be singing them and I'm going to be telling the stories behind them. From my book, Stories Behind the Best Loved Songs at Christmas. I'm so excited for this. I happen to think that Lorri has one of the most beautiful voices ever, and I've had a sneak peek at these songs and I had goosebumps and chills. I'm not kidding. So I can't wait to get into this with you. So you can do one of two ways. You can go to her channel, watch the songs, and then come to mine and hear the stories, or you could alternate them. Open them up on two tabs, watch her sing one song, listen to the story, watch her sing a song, listen to the story. It's up to you. It's going to put you in such a great Christmas mood, you guys. It really is. Okay, so let's get started. I'll need my glasses, and I'll try to avoid the glare. The first, I'm going to try to do them in the order that she did them, and that means that Oh Holy Night was the first song I believe she sang, which is one of my favorite songs. So, and please excuse my French accent, it's atrocious. Okay. Oh Holy Night. The strange and fascinating story of Oh Holy Night began in France, yet eventually will make its way around the world. This seemingly simple song, inspired by a request from a clergyman, would not only become one of the most beloved anthems of all time, it would mark a technological revolution that would forever change the way people were introduced to music. In 1847, Placide Cappeau de l'Orchmar was the commissioner of wines in a small French town, but he was known more for his poetry than his church attendance. And it probably shocked him when his parish priest asked him to pen a poem for the Christmas Mass. Nevertheless, the poet was honored, and he wanted to share his talents with the church. In a dusty coach traveling down a bumpy road in France's capital city, Cappeau considered the priest's request. The poem obviously had to be religious, focused on Christmas, and based on scripture. He used the Gospel of Luke as his guide. Cappeau imagined witnessing the birth of Jesus in Bethlehem. Thoughts of being present on that blessed night inspired him. By the time the commissioner arrived in Paris, the poem, Cantique de Noël, had been completed. Moved by his own work, Cappeau determined that his Cantique de Noël wasn't just a poem, but a song, and it needed a master musician's hand. He was not musically inclined, but he turned to one of his friends, Adolphe Charles Adams, for help. Adolphe was born in 1803 and was 5 years older than Cappeau. He was also the son of a well-known classical musician. He had already produced one-act operas. He had had success with ballets as well. His talent and fame were bringing requests to write works for orchestras and ballet from all over the world. Yet the lyrics that his friend Cappeau gave him challenged the composer in a fashion unlike any he had received before. As he studied Cantique de Noël, he couldn't help but note its overtly spiritual lyrics, embracing the birth of the Savior. Now he was a man of Jewish descent, and this represented a holiday he didn't celebrate, and a man he did not view as God. Nevertheless, he was moved by more than friendships, and he quickly and diligently went to work. He attempted to marry an original score to the Cappeau's beautiful words. Adams' finished work pleased both poet and priest. It was performed just 3 weeks later at a midnight mass on Christmas Eve. Neither the commissioner nor the composer were prepared for what happened next. Initially, Cantique de Noël was wholeheartedly accepted by the church in France, and the song quickly found its way into various Catholic Christmas services. But when Placide Cappeau walked away from the church and became a part of the socialist movement, and church leaders discovered that Adolphe Adams was Jewish. The song, which had quickly grown to be one of the most beloved Christmas songs in France, was suddenly and uniformly denounced. The heads of the French Catholic Church deemed Cantique de Noël as unfit for church services because of its lack of musical taste and total absence of the spirit of religion. Yet, even as the church tried to bury the song, the French people continued to sing it. And a decade later, a very reclusive American writer brought it to a whole new audience halfway across the world. Born May 13, 1813, John Sullivan Dwight was a graduate of Harvard College and Divinity School. He became a Unitarian minister in Massachusetts, but for some inexplicable reason, he grew physically ill every time he had to address a congregation. The panic attacks magnified to a point where they realized he could not continue in the ministry. He was gifted and bright, so he sought other ways to use his talents. He was an accomplished writer, and he used his skills to found Dwight's Journal of Music. For 3 decades, he quietly edited the publication. Although he couldn't face crowds of people, some of the most gifted musicians and music lovers in the Northeast were inspired by his confident writings. As he looked for new material to review, he suddenly found Cantique de Noël in French. The former minister fell in love with the carol's haunting lyrics. Not only did he feel that this wonderful Christmas song needed to be introduced to America, he saw something else in the song that moved him beyond the story of the birth of Christ. He was an ardent abolitionist, and he so identified with the lines, "Truly he taught us to love one another. His law is love and his gospel is peace. Chains shall be break, for the slave is our brother, and in his name all oppression shall cease." The text supported Dwight's own view of slavery in the South, that it must be abolished. The writer believed that Christ came to free all men. Keeping the original meaning intact, he translated the lyrics into a haunting, beautiful English text. It was published in his magazine and in several songbooks of the period. "O Holy Night" quickly found favor in America, especially in the North during the Civil War. Back in France, even though the song had been banned for almost 2 decades, many commoners still sang Cantique de Noël at home. And legend has it that on Christmas Eve in 1871, in the midst of a fierce fighting between the armies of Germany and France during the Franco-Prussian War, a French soldier suddenly jumped out of his muddy trench. Both sides seemingly stared at this crazed man. Boldly standing there with no weapon in his hands, he lifted his eyes to the heavens, and he sang the Cantique de Noël. After completing all 3 verses, a German infantryman came out of his hiding, and he answered, singing the German song, "From heaven above to earth I come." The story goes that the fighting stopped for the next 24 hours, while the men on both sides observed a temporary peace in honor of Christmas Day. Perhaps this story had a part in the French church once again embracing Cantique de Noël, and they deemed it worthy of inclusion in the holiday services. Isn't that a great story? I love that. And now, my all-time favorite Christmas carol, which is "Mary, Did You Know?" I first heard this from Kathy Mattea, but my current favorite version is the Pentatonics. Well, it was until I heard Lorri's version. I think Lorri's version is my favorite. So, "Mary, Did You Know?" No Christmas song written in the past 3 decades has provoked the kind of response that "Mary, Did You Know?" has. Buddy Green's simple and touching melody certainly deserves some of the credit, but most people who hear this song are drawn to the unique perspective found in Mark Lowry's dynamic lyrics. Yet this song's gift to the world may have been lost forever. if a set of loving parents hadn't decided to believe in the promise and potential that God had placed in their son. Mark Lowry was one of the most interesting personalities in gospel music. He was a singer with the Gaither vocal band, a humorist, and a songwriter. He never stops moving. He seems to have the energy of 3 fifth graders and the curiosity of a dozen 4-year-olds. Probably because the Lord knows the world couldn't handle more than one. There's no one like him. One observer called him a raccoon in human form. No one could keep up with him, and everyone wondered how his parents could. Mark started singing almost before he learned to talk. As a preschooler, he was belting out solos in the grade school choir, and by 3rd grade, he was singing the lead in the Easter musicals. Yet, even though he constantly seemed to be in the school spotlight and lived in the seemingly perfect American family environment, there were rough waters ahead. He stood out in his teacher's eyes for more than his singing. He was often a problem in the classroom. During his first years at elementary school, he was diagnosed as hyperactive and put on medication. At about the same time, it became apparent he had no athletic ability. He was known as a bit of a klutz. But rather than allow their son to be sidetracked, his parents made sure that his curse was looked at as a blessing, and they always emphasized the positive to him. They assured Mark that God had a plan for his life, and that his uniqueness was just a part of it. Instead of trying to make him act like the other kids, they allowed him to exploit his curiosity and his energy. He loved performing, so they put him on any stage that would take him. And that's where he found the National Quartet Convention. While he was there, he received his biggest break and his calling. At the convention, Lowry sang in front of 15,000 gospel music fans. The audience couldn't get enough of him, and Benson Records saw his potential. They signed Mark, and over the next few years, he cut inspirational albums with the likes of the London Symphony Orchestra. He had to finish junior and senior high school through correspondence courses. In 1984, he was living in Houston. Having felt blessed to have Lowry in his flock, Mark's pastor asked him to write the program for the Living Christmas Tree Choir presentation. He needed to write a bridge to connect one of the familiar songs with another. It was while he was working on the project that Mark considered what it would have been like to be Jesus' mother. When I wrote this thing about Mary, I began by thinking I was interviewing her on what her thoughts were as the mother of Jesus. There were a couple lines that stood out to me. One especially, when you kiss your little baby, you've kissed the face of God. And I thought this needs to be in a song. Keeping the perspective of a reporter doing a story on Jesus from Mary's point of view, he penned a poem that sent chills up his spine. Still, taking these powerful lyrics and turning them into a song was a bigger challenge than he expected. He gave the song to a talented writer, but it wasn't correct. And rather than let it be recorded not right, he kept it to himself. In 1988, after Gary McSpadden left the Gaither vocal band, Bill Gaither was looking to replace him. He saw a video of Mark, and he was impressed with his singing, and he thought he could bring a great deal of Christian humor to the group. When he called, Mark packed his bags. He had been with the band for about 2 years when Buddy Green joined them. Buddy was a talented musician, and he was just starting to hit his stride. Mark decided to share Mary Did You Know with him. Rather than pull Green to one side and share the story, Mark wrote a note over the top of the lyrics. Hey buddy, here are some God-inspired words. Please add some beautiful music and make it a profitable hit. He meant it as a joke, but Green took it very seriously. He set the lyrics aside for a couple of weeks, and then he went to work. When he finished, he called Mark on the phone and sang it to him. He loved it, and within a week, they were putting together a demo. Their pick for the song was impressed as well. When Mary Did You Know was originally cut by Christian sensation Michael English, the writing duo felt blessed. but neither of them expected all of the others to start jumping on the bandwagon. Country singer Kathy Mattea heard the Lowry Green number and recorded it. Scores of other acts then took the song into the studio, including Natalie Cole. Thanks to this exposure, Mary Did You Know was soon adopted by choirs and soloists everywhere. Even President Bill Clinton declared it his favorite Christmas carol. There can be no doubt that Mark Lowry was born different. The things that made him unique, his energy and his curiosity, could have held him back. He could have been forced to conform, to be like everyone else. Yet his parents viewed his problems as gifts, and he thrived. He looked at the world through his unique, God-given perspective. And because of that, we were able to have Mary Did You Know, a song like no other Christmas carol ever penned, written about a mother like no other, came from the hand of a man like no other. And I'm not kidding you guys, go and listen to Lorri sing it. She sings such a beautiful version. Now the next one, I am going to put timestamps in below in the description so that you know where these songs are and it'll be easier to find. Because I did tell the Mary Did You Know and the next one, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, before. But I think they're worth retelling, don't you? So, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, which is another beautiful song. During Hollywood's golden era, the movie studios kept the songwriting team of Hugh Martin and Ralph Blaine busy. The men worked together and separately on classic movies and musicals such as Girl Crazy, Broadway Rhythm, and Gentlemen Preferred Blondes. They worked with the likes of Lucille Ball, June Allison, Lena Horne, Ethel Merman, Mickey Rooney, and Ann Miller. They were responsible for millions of record sales. But these Hall of Famers penned their most beloved hit when MGM asked them to write the music for the movie Meet Me in St. Louis. But it would take the talent and insight of a certain entertainment legend to put the finishing touches on what would be a timeless holiday offering. Filmed towards the end of World War II, Meet Me in St. Louis starred some of the brightest names at MGM. Mary Astor, Leon Ames, June Lockhart, Margaret O'Brien, they were all on the bill. But this movie ultimately belonged to the 22-year-old screen veteran who 5 years before had charmed everyone as Dorothy in Wizard of Oz. While she was one of Hollywood's top box office draws, Judy Garland needed a strong film to help her overcome the juvenile image created by Wizard of Oz. She needed a movie role that would allow her to shift from child star to legitimate adult lead. Meet Me in St. Louis provided this vehicle. She needed to take her career over the rainbow and onto solid ground. It was Judy's own instinct and sincere voice that made the one moment in this film an unforgettable holiday gift. For one of the film's key scenes, Judy's character Esther was to sing a song to her little sister Tootie. The younger girl was worried that because the family was moving to New York from Missouri, Santa wouldn't find her. And Esther herself was worried. She had just fallen in love, and she was afraid the move would affect that. Though the scene was set on a beautiful Christmas Eve night, both sisters felt as if their worlds were ending. Looking out over a snow-covered lawn from an upstairs window, Judy's character winds the music box and begins to sing. The songwriter felt that to make the most of the film's suddenly tender and sad atmosphere, they needed a song that was full of irony and pain. So at the beginning, they had written, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas. It may be your last. Next year, we will be living in the past. Thinking they had written a perfect song, they were shocked when Judy Garland flat out refused to sing it. She sent the song back and demanded a more positive spin on the number. Judy's desires were backed by the film's director and her future husband, Vincente Minnelli. Unable to convince them that their instincts weren't right, Blaine and Martin went back to work. Even though they had guessed right about the needs of the movie, Garland had better instincts for what the country needed at this moment in time. During much of the past 3 years, Judy had spent every spare moment entertaining American troops. She had visited with the young men, sung for them, and read the fan mail they had written her. They were boys her age, and they were fighting for their lives, defending the nation they all lived in. What the men wanted more than anything else was to live through the war and come home. They needed to believe that there was life left for them. As she entertained the GIs, Garland discovered that her biggest hit, Somewhere Over the Rainbow, had a much deeper meaning for them. For them, the song represented coming home. By request, Blaine and Martin obligingly wrote a far more upbeat new opening. There was an obvious, encouraging tone in Let Your Heart Be Light. From now on, our troubles will be out of sight. And it presented the kind of message that Garland felt America needed. Judy embraced the revised Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas with a passion and emotion that few could understand. This wasn't just another song to Garland. It was a prayer for the millions wanting nothing more than to come home for Christmas. In the new version of Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas, listeners in the U.S. and overseas could believe that the war was almost over, and the families would reunite, and the promised joy that had been a part of Christmas would soon be here again. As moving as Judy's performance of the song in the film was, the Decca single that was released for Christmas 1944 was just as touching. Judy's rich voice revealed her full range of emotion found in the song's lyric. In an era when Christmas songs seemed to mean more than they ever had before, Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas was one of the best. When Judy sang to soldiers at the Hollywood canteen, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. When battle-weary men in Europe and the Pacific heard it, they clung to the song as if their dreams were carried on each word and note. I love that story. I love that people trust their instincts so much. Okay, one of the next songs that Lorri's going to sing is Do You Hear What I Hear? And I just love this song. I really do. I love them all, but this one I do. And she sings it so hauntingly and beautifully. You have to hear these. Okay. The odds of Gloria Shane and Noel Regney coming together were long at best. Yet somehow, although born worlds apart, a Frenchman and an American found each other in the middle of the world's busiest city and eventually teamed up to create a Christmas song that was truly inspired. Noel Regney grew up in Europe with a deep love of music. As a young man, his effort to create new classical compositions was interrupted by the outbreak of World War II. He was forced into the Nazi army, but Regney soon escaped to his native France and joined a group of resistance fighters. Instead of writing peaceful music, he spent the rest of the war fighting to bring peace back to France. After the war, it was music that brought Noel to the United States, and in the late 1950s, he wandered into New York's Beverly Hotel. There, in the luxurious dining room, he saw a beautiful woman playing popular music at the piano. Though he spoke very little English, Noel was so enthralled that he boldly introduced himself to Gloria Shane. Within a month, the man who spoke rudimentary English and the woman who didn't understand French married. On the surface, Noel and Gloria's union was very unique. What could an American woman determined to write rock and roll and a Frenchman in the States to record classical music have in common? Yet it would take the marriage of both their skill and insight, as well as their cultures and experience, to create a song that would cause millions around the world to stop, look, and listen. By 1962, Noel had mastered English and had been completely exposed to the world of American popular music. Thanks in large part to Gloria's writing a huge rock and roll hit, teen idol James Dearen had cut Shane's Goodbye Cruel World and took the number to the top of the charts. As her career took off, Gloria's passion for writing magnified. She spent hours each day at the piano beating out new material. While Noel saw the financial potential of popular music and heard his wife playing it every day, He still wanted to create something beautiful that would last far longer than a quick trip up the charts. The inspiration that would utilize both the man's classical imagery and his wife's contemporary beat was to come from yet another war. This one fought a long way from the American city Regni now called home. Noel had often prayed that World War II would be the war that would finally end all wars. He couldn't imagine anyone wanting to revisit the horrors that he viewed firsthand. Yet his prayers had been shattered in the 1950s by the fighting in Korea. After Korea, Regni watched his native France and then the United States become entangled in a bloody jungle battle in Vietnam. As more and more young men were injured and killed, the Frenchman wondered if the world would ever find real peace. Fighting the depression brought by flashbacks to his own days as a soldier and during the resistance, coupled with the news that he saw on television each day, Noel sought out something that would bring him peace of mind. In an effort to put his pain into perspective, he turned back to the one moment in time when he felt the Lord had given men a chance to live life without hate, fear, or conflict. Picking up a pen, Regni wrote a poem about the first Christmas. Fighting through some of the most difficult moments he had ever faced, Noel pushed away his nightmarish memories of World War II, the news from Vietnam, and the current tensions between the USSR and the US, a pressure that seemed to be pushing the world into yet another war. As he concentrated on the events leading up to the birth of Jesus, the world around him grew strangely quiet. His memories took Noel back to a scene of sheep walking through the beautiful green fields in his native France. He considered the innocence of a newly born lamb. This was a creature whose spirit man would emulate, an animal that surely the Creator himself had touched in a very special way. Thoughts of the lamb and a child who might have cared for it inspired Noel to write a poem that not only described peace on earth, but also spoke of the peace that came to earth that first Christmas night. When he finished, Gloria recalled, Noel gave it to me and asked me to write the music. He said he wanted me to do it because he didn't want a song to be too classical. I read over the lyrics and then went shopping. I was going to Bloomingdale's when I thought of the first music line. When Gloria returned home, she discovered that she had inserted an extra note in her melody, causing her music to no longer fit the lyrics. Listening to what his wife had composed, Noel opted to add a word rather than risk losing what he considered one of the most beautiful melodies he'd ever heard. So, said the wind to the little lamb became, said the night wind to the little lamb. Not only did this addition keep the music intact, but the imagery of God speaking on the wind became even more wondrous. Yet when Gloria asked him to change one more line in the first verse, he balked. I told him that no one in this country could understand tail as big as a kite, Gloria explained. Yet he wouldn't change it. As it turned out, he was right. It was a line that people dearly love. The couple took the finished song to the Regent Publishing Company owned by the brothers of famed big band leader Benny Goodman. It was one of New York's best-loved music houses. With Noel singing and Gloria playing, the song made its professional debut. Within minutes, Regent had contacted Harry Simone. It was his group that had scored a huge Christmas hit 4 years before with Little Drummer Boy. Simone wanted to hear the song right away. Since the couple didn't have a demo, Gloria recalled that this created a major problem. Noel couldn't play and sing at the same time, and I had to go play for a commercial. I couldn't break my date, so he went by himself. When he got home, he told me he botched it up. Gloria and Noel had every reason to believe Do You Hear What I Do? What I Hear would not be recorded, even if Regni had performed perfectly the song for Simeon, since David Seville's comical Chipmunks had recently scored with a novelty Christmas number. It seemed that no one was looking for a spiritual holiday song. Both were shocked when a few days later, the Harry Simone Choral recorded their touching work with plans to release it as a single. Noel hadn't much success in his classical career, Gloria recalled, and he wanted to do something meaningful and beautiful. In this song he did. The couple could not have dared imagine the effect Do You Hear What I Hear would have on the nation. At the height of the Cold War, millions like Noel were yearning for peace and hope. The carol's combination of words and music powerfully voiced those prayers. Newspaper stories of the time wrote of drivers hearing it for the first time in the radio and pulling their cars off the side of the road to listen. It seemed the song didn't just touch the world. It made people stop, look, and listen. In 1963, Do You Hear What I Hear became a Christmas standard when it was recorded by Bing Crosby. It was sung in church choirs, and it became an integral part of television specials. It inspired numerous magazine features and even Christian sermons. We couldn't believe it, Gloria admitted. So many people wrote us to tell us how much the song meant to them. We didn't know that it would cause that kind of outpouring of emotion. When Robert Goulet sang it and came to the song, Pray for Peace, People Everywhere, he almost shouted the words out. It was that powerful. Goulet had gotten it right. That shout was exactly what Noel thought the world needed to be doing each day, demanding peace for all the people everywhere. I love that. I did not know that. For some reason, I feel like these songs are hundreds of years old, and they're really not, you know. And now, the last song is, do I have it? Silent Night. Let's see if I have that. I do. So we'll do Silent Night, and that will be the last one. Even though Silent Night has recorded more than any other song in history, the fact that we know it at all is a miracle. Created out of necessity and performed in a tiny village on a solitary Christmas Eve by two ordinary Austrians and a tiny choir, this incredibly beautiful and simple carol owes its debut to an organ that wouldn't play and a priest who wouldn't hold a Christmas Mass without special music. Later, just weeks into the new year, the beloved carol's march to worldwide popularity was begun by the man who came to fix the faulty instrument. In 1817, 25-year-old Joseph Moore was assigned to the position of assistant priest at St. Nicholas Church in Austria. A lover of music since his boyhood in Salzburg, Moore was placed in charge of the music used at the small church, and he even wrote poems and song lyrics for special services. A seemingly tireless and giving man, he spent much of his spare time ministering to the children from the area's poorest families. In his desire to serve and inspire, if ever a man fulfilled the full description of the word pastor, it was Moore. In 1818, during a particularly cold winter, Moore was making last-minute preparations for a special Christmas Eve Mass, a service he had been planning for months. Everything from music to message was in place. But as he cleaned and readied the sanctuary, the priest encountered an unfathomable dilemma. St. Nicholas's organ would not play. A frantic Moore struggled with the old instrument for hours, making adjustments, fiddling with keys, stops, and pedals, even crawling behind the console to see if he could see a problem. But it would not play. Realizing he could do nothing else, the priest paused and prayed for inspiration. He asked God to show him a way to bring music to his congregation on the year's most meaningful day of worship. Moore would find the answer to his prayers born from events initiated almost 2 years before St. Nicholas's organ played out. In 1816, while assigned to a church in Mariafar, Moore had written a Christmas poem. The 6 unadored stanzas were inspired on a winter's walk from his grandfather's home to church. Though he shared the words with a few friends, the priest never sought to have the work published, nor attempted to come up with a melody to go with the words. When Moore was transferred to the church in Oberdorf, he had brought the poem along with very few of his personal possessions. Digging Stille Nacht, Silent Night, Holy Night, in Austrian, from his desk, he read the words over 2 years later. Up until that moment, the verses hadn't seemed very important to the priest. But as he read them again, It was as if the Lord was tossing him a lifeline of hope. Buoyed by new and unfolding expectation, he shoved the worn paper into his coat pocket and rushed into the night. This was only hours before the Christmas Eve midnight mass. The priest fought his way through snow-covered streets. On the same evening, 31-year-old schoolteacher Franz Gruber was struggling to stay warm in his drafty apartment over the schoolhouse. Though he had once studied organ with noted teacher George Hardelbuller, he now played the instrument only for St. Nicholas's modest services. He went over notes from one of his lessons. Gruber must have been surprised to find an insistent knock at his door, and there was Father Moore on the other side. By the time the priest could have been at the church preparing for services, not visiting old friends and colleagues. After a quick Merry Christmas, the obviously agitated priest pulled the teacher to the apartment's small table and signaled for Gruber to sit down. In a distressed tone, Moore explained the problem they faced. After he convinced Gruber nothing could be done to fix the organ, he showed him his poem. "Franz," he begged, "can you write the music to these words that can be easily learned by our choir without the organs? I guess we can play it on a guitar." The priest glanced at the clock on the table. "Time is short." Studying the poem, Gruber nodded his head. The look in his eyes and the smile on the schoolteacher's face showed that he was up to the challenge. Confident again that God had somehow had a special plan for this Christmas Eve, Moore raced back across the snow to the church, leaving Gruber alone with his thoughts, a ticking clock, and a prayer for inspiration. A few hours later, the two friends met at St. Nicholas. There, in the candlelit sanctuary, Gruber showed his new music with Moore. The priest approved, and after learning the guitar chords, rushed it to the choir members, who were waiting for their scheduled rehearsal. What should have taken weeks to accomplish was done in hours. Just after midnight, Moore and Gruber stood in front of the main altar and introduced the simple little song. As they sang, they couldn't have guessed that Silent Night, Holy Night would be remembered not only the next Christmas in their small village, but almost 200 years later around the world. A few weeks into the new year, Karl Moracher, an organ builder and repairman from Ziller Valley, traveled to Oberndorf to fix St. Nicholas's organ. While Karl worked, Moore shared the story of how he and Gruber had used a guitar and an original composition to save Christmas Eve Mass. He even sang him the song, and he considered it an answered prayer. Impressed, the repairman jotted down the words and learned the melody. Over the next years, he went about his profession. He introduced Silent Night to many churches and towns. During the 19th century, Austria and Germany had scores of traveling folk singers. Most of the groups were composed of family members who not only sang, but worked specialist jobs to earn their keep as they journeyed from town to town. In 1832, the Strasser family folk singers appeared in a small community where the organ repairman had recently installed an organ. During their stay, the family of singing glove makers learned of Silent Night. A few weeks later, at a concert in Leipzig, the Strassers performed the carol in front of a large crowd that had gathered for a fair. Moved by the song's deep spiritual message, King William IV of Prussia requested his nation's cathedral choir sing Silent Night at his annual Christmas celebration. Due in part to the king's favor, this song stormed across much of Eastern Europe and pressed its way into Great Britain. In December 1839, another Austrian family group, the Rainers, traveled to New York. As part of their performance, the family sang Silent Night in English for a huge crowd at Trinity Church. It was such a popular number that the other local groups began to sing it in churches. And by the Civil War, Silent Night had become America's most popular Christmas carol. During the battle between the Union and the Confederacy, it was not unusual for hostilities to cease for 4 days, starting on December 25th, with troops from both sides laying down their arms to come together to worship, to share gifts, to read scriptures, and to sing Silent Night. As the carol's popularity spread, so did the legends about its origin. At various times, music publishers gave composition credits to Beethoven, Bach, and Handel. It was only when Franz Gruber began a letter-writing campaign to newspapers and publishers, producing a copy of one of the very first arrangements, that the true origin of Silent Night was finally recognized. Yet, even with the melody's rightful history secured, fanciful stories about the song's lyrics continued to spread. Joseph Moore died penniless in 1848, before being recognized as the carol's writer. Without the priest alive to refute the story, it became generally accepted that the song's lyrics had been written in haste after it was discovered that mice had chewed through the organ's bellows and disabled the instrument. Though a wonderful story and still accepted by millions, it is one of fiction more than fact. By the late 1800s, Silent Night had been translated into more than 20 languages and was a vital part of Christmas celebrations all around the world. And by the 20th century, like the celebration of Christmas itself, Silent Night had moved out of the church and into the mainstream. I hope you all enjoy that very much. I thoroughly enjoyed reading them, and you are really going to enjoy hearing Lorri Latte sing them. So please, go to Lorri Latte ASMR. I will try to link it in my description below, and please enjoy our collaboration. I am so grateful that she agreed to do this. And remember, everyone, I love you, I value you, I honor you, and I am so very, very glad that you were born.